We finally received some official updates, everyone. Intensive testing of Starship V3 is set to begin soon, following the completion of work on other hardware at the Massey facility. In other major news, after a long period of anticipation, Jared Isaacman has been officially appointed as NASA's administrator. Meanwhile, NASA has reported a loss of contact with a Mars orbiter. Let's explore all of these developments in today's episode of Great SpaceX. For our top story today, in recent weeks we have been witnessing an extraordinary pace in SpaceX's vehicle stacking operations. The speed at which new hardware is coming together has been nothing short of remarkable, and all signs indicate that Ship 39, also known as S39, has now completed its production phase. This raises an important question that many observers have been asking. If S39 is finished, why has it not entered testing yet? The answer lies at the Massey test site, where SpaceX has been heavily focused on a series of test tank campaigns. These test tanks are specialized prototypes designed to validate individual upgrades and structural changes planned for the new Starship V3 configuration. Rather than rushing the flight vehicle directly into testing, SpaceX has chosen to methodically verify each improvement in isolation. This approach helps reduce risk and ensures that the final vehicle benefits from fully validated systems. However, all indications suggest that this phase is now coming to an end and that the path is finally clear for S39 to begin its own test campaign. On the evening of December 16th and continuing into the morning of the 17th, SpaceX conducted its 11th test using Test Tank 17 inside the test cage at Massey. This marked a significant milestone in the test tank program. Then, at noon, on the 17th, observers noted that Test Tank 39.1 was lifted away from the test stand. This movement strongly suggests that active testing with these prototypes has concluded. With the test tanks no longer occupying the facility, they will likely be transported back to the production site for further evaluation or storage. More importantly, this clears up valuable space at Massey for the arrival of S39 and the start of its official testing campaign. S39 itself appears to be fully prepared for this next phase. The Gigabay doors are currently open, which typically signals a high level of readiness. The heat shield system is clearly visible, further confirming that the vehicle has completed major assembly steps. The rollout of S39 will require an official road closure, and that schedule is expected to be announced soon. Once S39 arrives at Massey, most of the subsequent testing will proceed without the need for additional road closures. The testing sequence for S39 will begin with a structural pressure test. This step is designed to confirm the integrity of the vehicle under simulated load conditions. Once engineers are satisfied with these results, SpaceX will proceed with a cryogenic test. During this phase, the tanks will be loaded with cryogenic propellants to verify the performance of the fuel tanks, plumbing, and associated systems under operational conditions. After completing cryogenic testing, S39 will return to Gigabay 2 for one of the most anticipated milestones of the entire campaign: engine installation. This will mark the first time that Raptor 3 engines are installed on an official Starship prototype. The installation was originally expected to happen several weeks earlier, but issues encountered with B-18 caused delays across the schedule. As a result, anticipation surrounding the engine installation on S39 has only continued to build. Once the engines are installed, S39 will return to Massey yet again for a static fire test. This test will represent the first public demonstration of Starship V3 powered by Raptor 3 engines. All necessary ground systems are already in place, including the SQD system, which has been installed at Massey since November. A successful static fire will effectively confirm that the testing campaign has achieved its core objectives. Following this milestone, S39 will return to Gigabay 2 for final preparations ahead of flight. At the same time, work on B-19 is also accelerating. In a previous update, the aft section of B-19 was moved into Gigabay 1. On the evening of the the 16th, SpaceX continued this progress by transporting section F24, which is the upper portion of the methane tank, into Gigabay 1 as well. This section will eventually connect directly to the forward section that includes the hot staging ring and grid fins. The arrival of the lifting jig that supports the hot staging ring at noon on December 17th further confirms that SpaceX is preparing to integrate the forward section. This strongly suggests that the forward section itself will arrive in the coming days. Once the forward section is mated with the F24 section, the assembly process will pause while the remaining methane tank sections are stacked. The forward section will then be installed last to complete the full stacking of B19. Based on the current pace, it's reasonable to expect this process to be completed by the end of the month. If everything proceeds smoothly, B19 will also make its way to Massey for cryogenic testing in early January of 2026. This timing is likely planned to follow the completion of S39's cryogenic tests. Staggering these operations allows SpaceX to maximize efficiency and avoid conflicts at the test site. Engine installation on B19 is expected to occur during the second week of January of 2026, with a static fire test potentially taking place in the third week of the month. If the schedule continues to accelerate, both S39 and B19 could be ready for flight as early as late January or early February. All of this points to one clear conclusion. The debut of Starship V3 is approaching rapidly, and the recent quiet period at Starbase is about to end. Intense testing and a renewed launch cadence are just around the corner. So, are you ready to see Starship return to full speed? Let me know by responding "Begin now" in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed this update, please like the video and subscribe to the channel to continue following SpaceX's development journey. Before we wrap up this part of the update, we'd like to share a milestone of our own. The channel has officially reached 190,000 subscribers, a milestone made possible entirely by your continued support. We hope you'll stay with us as we push toward the next goal of 200,000 in the near future. Your encouragement drives our team to keep raising the bar as we follow this journey alongside SpaceX. And so for that, we thank you so much. And while our channel reaches a new chapter, so does NASA. The agency now has a permanent administrator. On December 17th, the U.S. Senate confirmed Jared Isaacman as NASA administrator by a 67-30 vote, bringing an end to more than a year of interim leadership and uncertainty. Isaacman's confirmation was widely expected. During his Senate hearing, he outlined a clear vision for NASA's future that earned strong bipartisan support. Lawmakers cited his understanding of NASA's mission and the challenges facing U.S. space leadership as key reasons for approval. Reaction across the space sector was largely positive. Senator Tim Sheehy praised the confirmation, expressing confidence that Isaacman would help secure American leadership in the global space race. Acting Administrator Sean Duffy congratulated Isaacman and emphasized the importance of returning humans to the moon and staying ahead of China. Blue Origin CEO Dave Limp highlighted Isaacman's rare combination of commercial leadership and spaceflight experience, calling it a strong foundation for guiding NASA forward. At 42, Isaacman brings an unconventional background to the role. He's the founder and CEO of Shift4, a major payments company and a billionaire private astronaut. He has commanded 2 SpaceX missions under the Polaris program, including Inspiration 4, the first all-civilian orbital mission, and Polaris Dawn, which featured the first civilian spacewalk. His nomination faced setbacks earlier this year, but momentum returned after a November Politico report which revealed Project Athena, a 62-page document outlining his ideas for a leaner, more agile NASA. Shortly afterward, he was formally renominated, clearing the way for confirmation. Isaacman now takes charge at a pivotal moment. NASA faces tight budgets, major Moon and Mars ambitions, and rising international competition, particularly from China. Internally, the agency must also address slow slow decision-making, aging infrastructure, and organizational inertia. Some lawmakers have raised concerns about Isaacman's ties to SpaceX and Elon Musk, but those objections did not prevent confirmation. Across much of the space community, his commercial mindset and flight experience are seen as strengths. With expectations running high, Isaacman's tenure will be watched closely. His leadership will help define how NASA returns to the moon, prepares for Mars, and positions itself within an increasingly competitive global space environment. And as that broader future takes shape, NASA is also dealing with an unexpected challenge much closer to home. The agency is investigating an unusual issue with its Maven Mars orbiter, a critical spacecraft that relays data between Earth and missions on the Martian surface. The trouble began on the 6th of December during a routine communications blackout when Maven passed behind Mars and temporarily lost contact with NASA's Deep Space Network. That loss was expected, but what wasn't expected was what followed. When Maven should have reappeared, the signal never returned. In a December 9th update, NASA confirmed that teams were actively investigating the anomaly. More insight came on the 15th after engineers recovered a fragment of tracking data recorded during the event. That data indicated Maven was rotating unexpectedly and that the frequency shift of its signal suggested a possible change in its orbit. Together, these signs raised concerns about the spacecraft's orientation and overall stability. Launched back in 2013, Maven was designed to study Mars's atmosphere and understand how the planet lost much of it over time, transforming Mars from a potentially habitable world into the cold, dry planet we see today. Although its primary mission lasted just 1 year, Maven far exceeded expectations. It has continued collecting valuable atmospheric data and has become a critical communications relay for NASA's Curiosity and Perseverance rovers. Despite the issue, NASA emphasized that Mars's surface operations will continue. Communications support remains available through other orbiters, including Mars's Reconnaissance Orbiter, Mars Odyssey, ESA's Mars Express, and the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter. Mission teams have already adjusted planning to route data through these spacecraft for the coming weeks. While the investigation continues, the incident serves as a reminder that even long-lived, well-understood spacecraft can encounter unexpected challenges. How NASA stabilizes Maven and what the data ultimately reveals will be closely watched as Mars's exploration moves forward. Big news! A critical White House executive order has just been released, clearly outlining a timeline for a human landing on the moon and the construction of a permanent lunar base with the goal of staying ahead of China. So what role will SpaceX play in this effort? At the same time, progress at Starbase continues to accelerate, especially as preparations move forward for several major upcoming tests. Meanwhile, Ariane 6 has just launched, marking an important milestone for Europe's space program. It's becoming increasingly clear that controversy and skepticism surrounding the U.S. lunar program are intensifying as official mission schedules draw closer. This is especially true for Artemis 3, which is planned to mark humanity's first return to the lunar surface in more than 50 years. With expectations rising and timelines tightening, questions about readiness, leadership, and long-term strategy are growing louder across both public and professional circles. That clarity arrived shortly after NASA officially confirmed its leadership, when the White House issued a new executive order titled Ensuring American Space Superiority. This order serves as a broad mandate for the U.S. aerospace industry and lays out a structured framework for what NASA and its partners must accomplish in the coming years. The executive order is extensive and detailed, containing multiple subsections that outline responsibilities, priorities, and deadlines. Among these, 2 sections focused on the moon stand out as particularly important. These sections include explicit timelines and objectives, which are formally listed in Section 2, Item A of the document. The first major directive states that the U.S. will return Americans to the moon by 2028 through the Artemis program. This wording is deliberate and significant. By explicitly naming the Artemis program, the executive order reinforces the existing roadmap rather than signaling a shift to an entirely new strategy. In doing so, it effectively quiets criticism from certain officials, including former NASA administrators, who have argued that Artemis is too complex or poorly structured and should be replaced with a different approach. However, the most important detail in this statement is not the program name, but the year. The target date is now 2028 rather than 2027, which NASA had previously announced earlier this year. The single-year difference has far-reaching implications, both politically and technically. The announcement prompted a wide range of reactions, including a brief but notable response from Elon Musk, who simply commented, "Cool." At first glance, the response might seem casual, but it raises an important question. Why would the head of SpaceX react so positively to what appears to be a delay? More importantly, why is he so nonchalant? What's up with that? To understand this, it helps to look at the broader geopolitical and technical context. Even with a 2028 deadline, the US would still be positioned ahead of China, which has publicly stated its intention to land humans on the moon by 2030. While it's impossible to know whether China could accelerate its schedule, the country has made steady progress this year on its launch vehicles, lunar lander designs, and crew spacecraft. That progress has kept international attention firmly focused on the timeline race. In this light, 2028 should be seen less as a fixed launch date and more as a firm deadline. In theory, missions could still occur earlier, possibly in late 2027 if technical readiness allows. The executive order sets a ceiling rather than a starting gun. Another important implication of this adjusted schedule is the opportunity it creates for SpaceX. Several reports and leaks suggest that SpaceX is targeting an uncrewed Starship HLS or Human Landing System mission to the moon in 2027, followed by a crewed landing in 2028. This plan has faced intense skepticism, particularly as figures such as Sean Duffy has suggested introducing internal competition for Artemis 3 roles. Such proposals have fueled concerns that SpaceX could lose its central position in the mission. However, by shifting the official deadline to 2028, the White House appears to be signaling a willingness to give Starship the time it needs to succeed. This approach also helps prevent major disruption to the Artemis program as a whole. Rather than forcing a premature decision or restructuring, the new timeline allows NASA and its partners to proceed with greater confidence and stability. If this interpretation is correct, SpaceX stands to benefit significantly. The company would gain additional time to refine critical systems and address unresolved technical challenges. Current projections suggest that 2026 will be the deadline for Starship version 3 to demonstrate its core capabilities. The complex orbital refueling system, which is essential for lunar missions, is not expected to begin construction until the middle of next year. Given these realities, launching an uncrewed Starship HLS to the moon too early would carry substantial risk. From this perspective, the revised schedule looks less like a delay and more like a practical reset. It allows for deeper testing, tighter integration, and stronger validation, all of which improve the odds of success. Even so, the timeline remains flexible. Many believe SpaceX could still push harder with an uncrewed Starship HLS landing in early 2027, followed by a crewed landing by mid-year. That gap would be sufficient to review data, resolve issues, and build confidence ahead of human flight. Achieving a crewed lander sooner would also carry strategic benefits, giving the US and SpaceX time to lock in gains and prepare for what comes next. Even more ambitious than the landing itself is the next objective outlined by the White House: building a moon base. The executive order calls for the US to establish the initial elements of a permanent lunar outpost by 2030, ensuring a sustained presence in space and supporting future missions to Mars. That is an extraordinary aggressive goal, requiring a functional base to take shape just 2 years after the first crewed landing. This timeline likely overlaps with the final preparation phase of China's own crewed lunar mission. As a result, the lunar base is not only a scientific or technological milestone, but a strategic signal of long-term commitment and capability at a critical moment. The key question is how NASA could realistically build a moon base on such a tight timeline. Using traditional methods, the task would be overwhelming, Modules would need to be built on Earth, launched separately, landed individually, and assembled on the lunar surface, requiring countless missions and years of coordination. Adding systems to mine and process lunar resources would only increase complexity. Under those conditions, a 2030 deadline would seem unattainable. That equation changes if Starship is used in a more unconventional way. One concept gaining attention is converting a Starship itself into a lunar base. In this scenario, a Starship would be fully outfitted on Earth with expanded life support, habitation, and research systems, then launched to the moon as a normal mission. Once there, it would be repurposed into a stationary base, either by using cushioning systems to transition it into a horizontal position, or by executing a controlled horizontal landing. Both approaches offer a far faster path to a large pressurized habitat than traditional modular construction. Even if Starship is not used directly as a base, its unmatched payload capacity makes it ideal for delivering massive modules, heavy equipment, and supplies to the lunar surface on an accelerated schedule. Taken together, these goals make the message unmistakable. The White House executive order firmly positions SpaceX as the center of America's lunar strategy, while repeated references to Mars make clear that the moon is a proving ground, not a final destination. Mars is the next major objective for both NASA and the US, and it remains the driving ambition behind SpaceX's Starship program. More than any other system, Starship represents NASA's strongest path to sending humans to Mars, sustaining long-term operations, and eventually establishing a permanent presence. This urgency is underscored by China's plans to return Mars samples between 2028 and 2031. With so much at stake, the conversation is just beginning. What are your thoughts on the government's new lunar plan? Let me know your perspective, and be sure to like and subscribe to follow SpaceX's journey ahead. Of course, to take full advantage of these opportunities, SpaceX will need to accelerate its progress significantly. The immediate focus is Flight 12, which is currently undergoing intense preparation. Based on recent updates, SpaceX is moving forward with preparations for S39, beginning with the completion of its associated test tank. The schedule for road closures related to test tank transport has now been announced, running from 11:59 a.m. on December 18th to 4 a.m. on December 19th. The published route runs from Massey to the production site, clearly indicating that this operation involves Test Tank 39.1, which was recently removed from its test stand. At the same time, SpaceX conducted the 12th test of Test Tank 17 inside the test cage on the evening of the 18th. These coordinated activities are designed to clear space and prepare the Massey site for S39 to arrive for cryogenic testing in the near future. Progress on B-19 is also accelerating. On the afternoon of the 18th, the forward section, known as FX3, was delivered to Gigabay. This section features the updated hot staging area as well as the opening for grid fin installation. With the lifting jig already in place, stacking with the rest of B-19 is expected to begin soon. There's likely still one major section missing, probably the main methane tank. Once that segment arrives and is stacked, B-19 will be structurally complete. If this happens before the 24th of this month, it would mark the fastest completion of a Super Heavy booster to date, surpassing all previous Starship and Super Heavy prototypes. These developments demonstrate SpaceX's determination to maintain momentum and push toward Flight 12 despite the issues encountered with B-18. The company appears committed to staying on schedule and moving forward aggressively. Finally, for today's report, we have an update from Europe. On December 17th, Ariane Space successfully launched Ariane 6 from French Guiana, carrying 2 Galileo navigation satellites into orbit. The mission, Galileo Launch 14, expands Europe's satellite navigation constellation, which now includes 26 active spacecraft and serves as Europe's alternative to the US GPS system. These satellites will deploy shortly after launch, complete initial checkouts, and gradually move into their final orbits more than 23,000 kilometers above Earth. With Ariane 6 now operational, Europe can once again launch Galileo missions independently after years of relying on SpaceX following the retirement of Ariane 5 and the loss of Soyuz access. This was Ariane 6's 5th flight and its 4th success in the past year, a meaningful step forward after a long and difficult development. While the milestone restores European autonomy in space, increasing launch cadence and lowering costs will be essential if Ariane 6 is to compete in an industry industry still dominated by SpaceX. Up and down, SpaceX remains firmly on the upswing, accelerating Starship preparations as Flight 12 draws closer. But today's downturn comes from elsewhere. ULA is facing a major leadership shakeup with the resignation of CEO Tory Bruno. At the same time, two rockets from Japan and South Korea suffered technical issues within the span of a single day, adding to a turbulent moment in global launch activity. We are now approaching the end of 2025, with 2026 just over the horizon. Christmas and New Year will arrive as they always do, one after the other. But for spaceflight followers, these holidays also mark something else. They signal that Starship Flight 12 is drawing closer with each passing day. Because of that, the SpaceX team remains in an intense phase of preparation, showing no signs of slowing down even as the year comes to a close. When it comes to the vehicle itself, a major milestone was reached on the afternoon of December 20th. The final section of Booster 19, also known as B-19, arrived at Gigabay. This section is widely believed to be part of the methane tank, which serves as the structural and functional connection between the hot staging section and the rest of the Super Heavy booster. That date, December 20th, is worth remembering. The reason is simple. The final section of B-19 arrived only 25 days after the first section departed from the production site on November 25th. When compared to B-18, this represents an astonishing improvement. For B-18, the same process took 136 days. In other words, SpaceX completed this phase of booster assembly more than 3.5 times faster. This is a dramatic demonstration of operational recovery and momentum. After the B-18 incident, most observers expected SpaceX to regroup and eventually return to flight. However, very few could have predicted just how strong and how fast that return would be. The pace of B-19's progress sends a clear message that SpaceX has not only addressed previous issues, but has also significantly refined its production and integration workflow. Based on current timelines, B-19 is expected to be ready for cryogenic testing in early January. That would then be followed by a static fire test in mid-January. Of course, this schedule is not entirely independent. The progress of S39 will play a role in determining exactly how quickly the booster advances through its testing campaign. Even so, if operations continue to accelerate, there is still a realistic possibility that Flight 12 could take place in late January or early February. That window remains surprisingly similar to the schedule previously targeted for B-18, despite everything that has occurred since then. This brings us naturally to the question of S39. A few days ago, a road closure schedule was announced for transport between the production site and Massey. Initially, this led many to believe that S39 was finally preparing to roll out. However, that rollout did not take place. S39 completed its full stacking process quite some time ago, so its continued presence at the production area suggests that additional work is still underway. The most likely explanation is that further monitoring, inspections, or modifications are being carried out. Given the recent history with B-18 and S-36, it's clear that SpaceX is being especially cautious. No one involved wants to risk a repeat of those incidents. There's also another important factor to consider. The Massey test platform itself appears to still be undergoing upgrades. After the installation of the SQD system, it seems SpaceX decided to further reinforce the platform by adding a static fire mount system. This static fire mount system is not entirely unfamiliar. The frame for this system matches components previously visualized in 3D renders shared by Chrome Kiwi, which we discussed in an earlier episode. Those renders suggested a more robust and flexible test configuration designed to support future ship testing campaigns. On the morning of December 19th, the first actual frame for this new system was vertically stacked on the Massey test platform. Just a few days later, by the afternoon of December 22nd, a second frame was lifted into place and installed alongside it. It's important to note that what has been installed so far represents only the frame structure. The primary functional component of the system has also recently been rolled by tow truck has likely already arrived at Massey. At the same time, this component resembles a large sail-like structure. How it will integrate with the existing frames is not yet clear, and its final configuration remains an open question. As always, answers will come once SpaceX completes the assembly and the system begins to to take its final form. Only then will it be possible to make more accurate predictions about how it will function during ship testing. In terms of schedule, there is hope that this work can be completed within the next few days. If that happens, S39 could still roll out and begin cryogenic testing in the final days of the year. That would be a strong way to close out 2025 and set the stage for an aggressive testing campaign in early 2026. Meanwhile, changes are also underway at the launch site itself. After extensive and continuous testing of the water deluge system, SpaceX appears to be shifting its focus toward another critical upgrade. The next major investment is a new actuator system for the chopsticks. This upgraded actuator system is expected to significantly improve chopsticks operations. It should allow for greater flexibility, faster opening and closing speeds, and smoother overall motion. Just as importantly, it will improve integration with future lift and launch vehicles, which is especially relevant as SpaceX prepares for the transition to Starship V3. At the production site, progress continues on another massive project. Gigabay is steadily rising, and its growth is easy to track thanks to the continuous addition of modules to the crane's cable tower. These additions allow the crane to operate at increasingly higher altitudes as construction advances. At the current pace, it's reasonable to expect Gigabay to be completed and operational by the middle of next year. Once finished, it will play a central role in supporting higher production rates and more advanced vehicle configurations. Taken together, all of this makes one thing very clear. The SpaceX team is racing against time, not just toward the first V3 flight, but toward the beginning of the V3 era as a whole. This is a pivotal moment for the Starship program, and the intensity of current operations reflects just how much is riding on the next series of flights. Now, let us shift our attention to what has become the industry's main focus today. Tory Bruno has officially stepped down from his role as CEO of ULA. After nearly 12 years in the position, which is an exceptionally long tenure in today's aerospace industry, Bruno has formally ended his leadership of ULA. In a brief farewell message posted on X, he wrote, "Thank you for the opportunity to lead this amazing team. They have put ULA in a great position to do important things for our customers and nation." Lockheed Martin Space, one of the two parent companies that founded ULA alongside Boeing, has also released a statement acknowledging his departure. The company said, "After nearly 12 years with ULA, we're grateful to Tory Bruno for his leadership as he departs for a new opportunity." That wording is notable. It strongly suggests that Bruno is not retiring, but instead preparing to take on another role at a different organization. Where that may be has not yet been announced. In the meantime, ULA's COO John Elbin will step into the role of interim CEO while a permanent replacement is sought. Lockheed Martin added, "We congratulate ULA's COO John Elbin as interim CEO and look forward to his leadership and exciting milestones ahead for the Vulcan rocket. In this incredible endeavor, we all lift each other." Bruno's resignation came as a surprise to many. There were no public indications leading up to the announcement, and the sudden change will almost certainly cause some degree of disruption within ULA. His time at the company was marked by significant challenges. Before becoming CEO in 2014, Bruno served as president of Lockheed Martin Strategic and Missile Defense Systems and spent 3 decades working on space and missile programs. He succeeded Michael Gass at a time when ULA's long-standing dominance in national security launches was beginning to erode. That erosion accelerated with the rise of SpaceX and the Falcon rocket family. SpaceX consistently secured military launch contracts, and major programs such as National Security Space Launch began to shift decisively away from ULA. At the same time, ULA's own rocket fleet entered a period of decline. Delta IV Heavy was retired in early 2024, bringing the Delta rocket family to an end. Atlas V is also approaching its final flights, largely due to the limited supply of RD-180 engines from Russia and the strategic decision by the US to eliminate reliance on Russian hardware. Vulcan Centaur was meant to represent ULA's next chapter. However, its development has been slow. Since the beginning of 2024, Vulcan has launched only 3 times. While it does eliminate dependence on Russian engines, it introduces new constraints. ULA does not produce its own engines and instead relies on Blue Origin's BE-4. This dependency limits flexibility and has contributed to delays. Equally important is the fact that ULA's rockets remain fully expendable. In an industry increasingly defined by reusability, this significantly weakens ULA's competitive position. As a result, the company's launch cadence has dropped sharply. Only 6 missions are planned, and the numbers in previous years were similarly underwhelming. Bruno had previously expressed optimism about reaching 20 to 25 launches next year, but with his departure, the future trajectory of ULA is uncertain. The company's financial situation has also been a concern. At various points, ULA was rumored to be a potential acquisition target, with names like Blue Origin and Sierra Space frequently mentioned. While no such deal has materialized, those rumors reflect the broader pressures facing the joint venture. The question now is what challenges await ULA as it navigates this leadership transition during an already difficult period. Finally, let's turn to a pair of setbacks that unfolded within less than a single day, underscoring just how unforgiving spaceflight can be. The first came from Japan. On December 21st, the H3 rocket launched from Tanegashima, carrying the Michibiki 5 navigation satellite. The ascent initially appeared nominal, but during the second stage, the engine failed to reignite and shut down early. As a result, the satellite could not reach its intended orbit, and the mission was declared a failure. JAXA issued a public apology and formed a special task force to investigate, with attention focused on the LE-5B-3 engine. This marks the second failure for H3, which had previously completed 5 consecutive successful missions. All future launches are now on hold pending the investigation. Less than a day later, South Korea faced its own disappointment. Startup InnoSpace attempted the first orbital launch of its Hanbit nano rocket from Brazil's Alcantara Space Center. About 30 seconds after liftoff, the vehicle failed in a visible explosion. No injuries or damage were reported. Early speculation points to strong vibrations causing a fuel leak, leading to rapid ignition and loss of the rocket. The mission had aimed to place 5 small satellites into orbit, an ambitious goal for a debut flight. Together, these failures are a stark reminder that rocket development remains brutally difficult. While companies like SpaceX push forward at unprecedented speed, many others across the industry continue to face hard lessons on the path to reliable access to space.
Again, China has just launched a new rocket in an attempt to replicate SpaceX's reusable rocket system. However, the outcome remains unchanged and the effort has ended in failure. Why is copying SpaceX proving to be so difficult? At the same time, the country has revealed the first official details of a new space station resupply vehicle. Meanwhile, Russia is moving forward with plans for a gravity-based space station project. In the previous episode, we discussed the challenges surrounding multiple Asian rocket launches that took place within less than a single day, focusing specifically on vehicles from Japan and South Korea. However, there was also a far more significant launch from China that deserves closer attention. This launch involved China's Long March 12A rocket, which lifted off at 9 p.m. on December 22nd. The mission departed from the Dongfeng Commercial Space Innovation Test Zone at the Jiuquan spaceport. Unlike many previous Chinese launches, this flight carried ambitions that extended well beyond simply reaching orbit. The primary objective of this mission was to attempt a vertical landing of the booster after stage separation. This approach closely mirrors the reusable launch vehicle strategies pioneered by SpaceX and, more recently, pursued domestically by companies such as Landspace with its Zhutui 3 rocket. The goal was clear. China is actively working to demonstrate that it can recover and reuse large orbital-class rocket boosters rather than discarding them after a single flight. During ascent, the mission appeared to progress smoothly. The rocket successfully cleared the launch tower, maintained stable flight, and completed stage separation as planned. Following separation, the booster initiated its descent sequence and attempted a re-entry burn. The target was a designated landing pad located approximately 250 kilometers away in Minqin County, within Gansu Province. However, despite these efforts, the landing attempt ultimately failed. Images released during the descent phase showed the booster with its engine glowing brightly, likely due to normal operational heating effects. The vehicle was also enveloped in a dramatic white venting plume, which made for striking visuals and suggested active propellant management or thermal processes during re-entry. recovery. What stood out to many observers, however, was that a similar visual effect appeared on the upper portion of the booster. This raised questions about whether exhaust plume interaction or reflected engine flow may have affected sections of the vehicle not designed to experience such conditions. It's possible that this interaction contributed to the failure of the landing attempt. Subsequent information revealed that the booster ultimately impacted the ground roughly 2 kilometers away from the intended landing pad. This significant missed distance strongly suggests that the booster's guidance, navigation, and control systems did not function as intended during the final phase of the descent. In practical terms, the booster lost the ability to precisely steer itself to the target location. Despite this setback, the mission cannot be classified as a total failure. The successful ascent meant that the rocket still achieved one of its key objectives, orbit. From an engineering and programmatic perspective, reaching orbit remains a critical milestone, especially when testing new vehicle configurations and recovery techniques. Following the flight, the Shanghai Academy of Spaceflight Technology, commonly referred to as SAST, released a statement acknowledging the unsuccessful landing attempt. At the same time, the organization emphasized that the flight produced a substantial amount of valuable data. According to SAST, this real-world flight data will play a crucial role in identifying technical shortcomings and guiding improvements for future missions. In the coming days and weeks, engineers are expected to conduct a comprehensive assessment and detailed technical evaluation of the mission. This process will likely examine every phase of flight, from ascent and separation to re-entry and terminal descent. From an outside perspective, there are several plausible explanations for what went wrong. One possibility is that the booster's communications or connectivity systems were damaged during re-entry. If telemetry or command links were disrupted, the onboard systems may have been unable to execute precise engine restarts for deceleration and course correction. Another possibility is that the engines themselves experienced issues after enduring extreme thermal and mechanical stresses, potentially including fuel leaks or combustion instability during the landing burn. Regardless of the specific cause, the overall outcome closely resembles other recent attempts at first-stage recovery by emerging launch systems. Notably, it echoes the early December Zhuquei 3 flight by Landspace, as well as Blue Origin's New Glenn debut. In all of these cases, the rockets performed well during ascent and successfully reached space or orbit, but failed during the recovery phase. This pattern once again highlights just how difficult it is to land and reuse orbital-class rockets. SpaceX has spent more than a decade refining this capability, and it has done so through repeated testing, frequent failures, and continuous iteration. For China, the approach to reusability appears particularly ambitious. Rather than gradually developing a unique recovery architecture, many Chinese programs have chosen to directly emulate existing SpaceX designs. In some cases, they even combine elements from different SpaceX vehicles into a single system. Despite repeated setbacks, these efforts are unlikely to slow down. Chinese agencies and private companies alike understand the enormous advantages of reusability. Lower launch costs, higher flight rates, and improved responsiveness are all benefits that SpaceX has clearly demonstrated over the past several years. One particularly striking concept that has drawn attention is the idea of catching rockets rather than landing them on legs. This method, which is most famously associated with Starship, involves using large robotic arms mounted on a launch tower to physically catch the returning vehicle and secure it for refurbishment. SpaceX has already demonstrated this capability multiple times with Starship test vehicles, successfully catching the booster using the tower-mounted arms. It did not take long for Chinese companies to take notice. Several months ago, Cosmoleap, also known as Beijing Dahang Transition Technology, released images of its LEAP rocket concept. These images showed a tower-mounted catching system that closely mirrored the Starship design, including large mechanical arms intended to intercept the returning booster. More recently, another startup called Astron Stone, officially known as Yushi Space Aerospace Technology, announced a new rocket project that also incorporates a catching arm system. Unlike other companies that are more discreet about their design influences, Astron Stone openly stated that it is fully aligning its technical approach with that of Musk's SpaceX. If successful, such a system would represent a remarkable engineering achievement. If it fails, however, the consequences could be catastrophic, potentially damaging launch infrastructure and setting programs back by years.
The challenge isn't simply recreating the hardware, it's matching the operational discipline, software maturity, and relentless iteration that underpins SpaceX's success. The question is whether that gap can truly be closed. From my perspective, the answer is no. SpaceX continues to operate on a level no competitor has matched. The company sets new launch and landing records with near annual regularity. Falcon 9 alone has now flown more than 580 missions, with roughly 165 launches this year, and rather than slowing down, that cadence continues to accelerate. Reusability only reinforces this dominance. SpaceX has landed Falcon 9 boosters more than 500 times across land-based pads and autonomous drone ships. Individual vehicles have reached extraordinary milestones, including booster B-1067, which has successfully flown and landed 33 times. These are not isolated achievements, but the result of a system operating at scale. Starship is the next major leap. Still in development, it has already demonstrated elements of its rocket-catching system. Next year, SpaceX plans 2-stage Starship launches aimed at achieving full system reusability, a first in orbital spaceflight. Even if early attempts face setbacks, the scale and pace of SpaceX's testing suggest rapid progress. For competitors trying to replicate these systems, closing the gap could take decades. At the same time, SpaceX is positioning itself for a sharp expansion in launch capacity. Ongoing growth at Starbase in Texas, paired with new facilities in Florida, once Starship is fully operational, that lead may grow even larger. Turning to China, the focus now shifts to orbital logistics. The country has released images of early hardware for a new Tiangong space station resupply vehicle known as Qingzhou, or Light Ship. It's one of 2 next-generation cargo systems under development alongside the Haolong space plane concept. Qingzhou is being developed by the Innovation Academy for Microsatellites under the Chinese Academy of Sciences. It's intended to be a smaller, lighter, and more cost-effective vehicle than the existing Tianzhou spacecraft. The revealed hardware resembles a cargo module rather than a traditional spacecraft, similar in appearance to Sierra Space's Shooting Star module. This design likely places thrusters at the rear, while a larger circular opening at the front houses the docking ports for Tiangong. Reported specifications point to a vehicle roughly 3.3 meters in diameter with a launch mass near 5,000 kilograms and a cargo capacity of up to 1,800 kilograms. The design includes both pressurized volume for crew supplies and an unpressurized section for external payloads and experiments. Qingzhou has reportedly cleared its design review, entered production, and is now awaiting systems integration. It's expected to fly aboard CAS Space's Kinetica 2 rocket, with the launch schedule driven by Tiangong's operational needs. Looking beyond China, Russia's space station ambitions appear increasingly speculative, yet also more expansive. Inertia has secured a patent for a rotating space station concept intended to generate artificial gravity. The design targets approximately 0.5 g through a rotating structure about 40 meters in diameter, spinning at roughly 5 revolutions per minute. Habitat modules would be mounted radially, using centrifugal force to simulate gravity. The patent acknowledges major challenges, particularly docking and resupply of a rotating station. Russia has not released a detailed roadmap or funding plan, and construction would likely follow the retirement of the ISS and require multiple launches. Even so, the idea reflects a recurring trend. Rotating habitats have appeared in studies for decades, from NASA concepts to modern commercial proposals. The motivation is clear. Artificial gravity could mitigate the serious health effects of long-term microgravity. Whether Russia can realistically pursue such a project remains uncertain, given its current economic and industrial constraints. For now, it stands as another ambitious concept, waiting to see if it can move beyond paper and into orbit. It's official. After months of speculation, Russia has unveiled new plans for a next-generation space station, complete with an aggressive and unconventional construction timeline that is already raising questions about feasibility. In the US, SpaceX is pushing hard toward its next major launch milestone, racing the clock under growing pressure. At the same time, NASA's Perseverance rover is closing in on a new distance record on Mars. marking another historic moment in planetary exploration. When discussions turn to the ISS, one issue is raised more often, and that is the difference in long-term planning between Russia and the rest of the partner nations. Russia now appears unlikely to leave the ISS as early as once feared. The explanation for this becomes clear once we take a closer look at Russia's revised plan for its next space station. Recently released images and materials from Roscosmos have provided a clearer picture of Russia's future orbital outpost, officially named the Russian Orbital Station, or ROS. These images outline not only the station's external structure, but also its internal capabilities and long-term objectives. Roscosmos has been direct about the goals behind this project. First, ROS is intended to ensure the continuation of Russian human spaceflight after the eventual end of the ISS program. Second, it's meant to address a broad range of scientific, technological, economic, and national security priorities. Finally, Roscosmos has framed ROS as a way to remain competitive. From a structural standpoint, the Russian orbital station is designed around a distinctive cross-shaped configuration. At the center of this structure is a core module that serves as the station's primary hub. This core module is designed with up to 6 docking and expansion points. Extending from the core are 2 opposing target production modules, each equipped with docking ports for visiting spacecraft. These modules are expected to support logistics, resupply operations, and potentially specialized industrial or research activities. The remaining 2 arms of the cross are designated for the science and energy module and the basic module, which is presumed to function as the primary living and working space for cosmonauts. Large solar arrays will be mounted at the ends of these modules, providing electrical power to support both crew operations and scientific equipment. Above and below the central core module are 2 additional components. One is the gateway module, which is expected to support extravehicular activity operations, including spacewalk preparation and airlock functions. The other is the service platform module, which will likely house propulsion systems, attitude control hardware, and other essential infrastructure needed to maintain the station's orbit and orientation. Alongside these visual designs, Roscosmos has released a set of technical specifications that offer further insight into the station's intended capabilities. The total unpressurized volume of ROS is listed at approximately 667 cubic meters, which is significantly smaller than the current ISS. The station is designed to host a crew of 2 to 4 astronauts at any given time. Operational plans call for approximately 1 to 2 crewed missions per year. Each crew is expected to remain aboard the station for roughly 6 months, maintaining a rotational presence rather than continuous full capacity occupation. In addition, the station will receive between 1 and 3 cargo resupply missions annually. Other notable specifications include a target internal equipment payload volume of up to 49 cubic meters, a power allocation of approximately 55 kilowatts for scientific instruments, fuel storage capacity of around 9,100 kilograms, and data transmission speeds of up to 300 megabytes per second. Roscosmos has also indicated that Vostok Spaceport, located in eastern Russia, is the most likely launch site for both station modules and resupply missions. According to the most recent updates, the overall plan and construction schedule for ROS have been formally approved. The station is slated to be built over a 6-year period from 2027 through 2033, divided into 2 distinct phases. The first phase, running from 2027 to 2030, involves the launch and assembly of 5 modules. These include the core module, the science and energy module, the service platform module, the gateway module, and the basic habitation module. The second phase, planned for 2031 through 2033, will expand the station further by adding the target module and the target production module. Despite the lengthy construction timeline, Russia has indicated that it intends to begin crewed operations relatively early. Under current plans, cosmonauts could be sent to ROS as soon as 1 year after construction begins, placing the first crewed missions around 2028. There are also several unique orbital characteristics worth noting. ROS is planned to operate at an altitude of approximately 400 kilometers and to fly in a polar or near polar orbit. This would allow the station to pass over nearly the entirety of Russian territory, providing advantages for Earth observation, communications, and national security monitoring. At the same time, Russian officials have stated that the station's orbital inclination will be approximately 51.6 degrees, which is similar to that of the ISS. This choice would make the station more accessible from the Baikonur Cosmodrome compared to earlier proposals that called for the inclination as high as 96 degrees. On paper, the Russian orbital station appears ambitious and technically capable. However, this is where the most serious concerns begin to emerge. Despite the appearance of a fresh design, ROS is not being built entirely from scratch. Instead, Russia plans to repurpose elements of its existing segment on the ISS as the foundation of the new station. In a recent update, Roscosmos official Oleg Orlov stated that the agency's Scientific and Technical Council had supported and approved the deployment of a Russian orbital station based on the Russian segment of the ISS as the primary scenario. This decision explains several aspects of the ROS design, including its similar orbital inclination. Under the current plan, new modules would be attached directly to the Russian segment of the ISS. Once the initial configuration is complete and stable, the assembled structure would separate from the rest of the ISS to operate independently. At present, it remains unclear which specific module within the Russian segment will serve as the core of the new station. The approach is conceptually similar to how Axiom Space plans to build its commercial space station by initially attaching modules to the ISS before eventual separation. According to this timeline, the separation would occur around 2030, marking the completion of the first construction phase. This is why earlier concerns about Russia leaving the ISS prematurely appear less urgent. Russia cannot realistically depart before its new station reaches a stable configuration. If this plan proceeds as described, the year 2030 could witness an unprecedented event in spaceflight history. The ISS would effectively split into two separate structures. The Russian segment would continue operating as part of the new Russian orbital station, while the remaining US-led segment would be deorbited in a controlled manner, likely using SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft. The long-term fate of the Japanese modules remains uncertain. This strategy, however, raises serious questions. Russia is choosing to carry forward some of the oldest and most problematic components of the ISS into its next-generation station. Many modules in the Russian segment were built during the earliest phases of the ISS program and are now decades old. Over the years, these modules have experienced repeated air leaks and other technical issues. Transferring such aging hardware into a new station introduces ongoing safety risks. Structural fatigue, outdated systems, and limited redundancy all increases the likelihood of future failures. These concerns are compounded by another often overlooked issue. After decades of continuous habitation, microbial contamination has accumulated inside ISS modules. Bacteria and fungi have become a persistent challenge. While the US and its partners plan to abandon these older modules entirely and transition to newly built commercial stations, Russia intends to incorporate them into its future outpost. This decision could negatively affect both crew health and overall quality of life. The idea of combining old, cramped, and visually worn modules with newly built components creates an uneven and arguably undesirable living environment. There are also practical risks during construction. Adding new modules to the Russian segment while it's still attached to the ISS could disrupt the station's balance and orbital stability, forcing more frequent propulsion maneuvers and increasing operational complexity. Taken together, this approach suggests that while Russia's ambitions remain substantial, its reliance on legacy hardware may limit long-term success. Rather than fully embracing modern station design, the plan leans heavily on past infrastructure. By contrast, the US is moving toward entirely new commercial space stations built from the ground up, with improved habitability and expanded research capacity. SpaceX has even explored large-scale stations and artificial gravity concepts. These projects are expected to begin launching later this decade, while China continues to upgrade its technologically advanced Tiangong station. Against this backdrop, Russia's strategy risks appearing stagnant. Without meaningful modernization, it may struggle to compete in the next phase of orbital development. Now, let's turn to the US and SpaceX's push toward annual launch goals. SpaceX recently launched launched another Falcon 9 mission from SLC-4E in California, deploying 27 Starlink satellites. The booster, B-1063, successfully landed on the drone ship Of Course I Still Love You, marking its 30th landing. The satellites were released about an hour after liftoff, bringing the Starlink constellation to more than 9,400 spacecraft in orbit. More importantly, this flight marked Falcon 9's 165th launch of the year. With just 5 more missions needed to reach the target of 170, SpaceX remains within reach as the year draws to a close. Turning to Mars on our final piece of today's updates, NASA's Perseverance rover is approaching a historic milestone. Since landing in February of 2021, the rover has traveled roughly 25 miles and is on track to reach about 62 miles over its lifetime. That would surpass the long-standing distance record set by the Opportunity rover. According to NASA engineers, Perseverance remains in excellent condition, with mobility system upgrades, systems capable of far exceeding their original design limits. The rover has climbed out of Jezero Crater, explored new terrain along the rim, and collected valuable rock samples. One of its most intriguing discoveries, a rock nicknamed Shayeva Falls, contains chemical features that may be linked to ancient microbial activity from a time when Mars was far wetter than today. As Perseverance continues to deliver groundbreaking science, a major challenge remains unresolved. NASA must still determine how to bring these samples back to Earth, a decision that will shape the future of Mars exploration. And with that, folks, this has been Kevin with Great SpaceX. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already to stay up to date with yours truly on the latest milestones in SpaceX's journey. Thank you so much for watching, and always remember, curiosity, imagination, and inspiration will follow you so long as you keep looking up.